Right guys, welcome back to the channel. In this video I'm just going to do a quick talk on bearings for you, so your bicycle wheel bearings mainly. So I'll go through, we'll just point out some of the things that you might not know about them, or if you're interested, which is the best sort of type of bearings to use, etc., and what to avoid. So we'll go ahead and I'll run through some of it for you. Right, so here we have the wheel in question. Now I'll just move it side to side for you so you can see. That's just applying the wheel bearings. They're cartridge bearings. It's that bad that you have to let the brakes off. Otherwise obviously it's going to be rubbing on, wearing away the brakes. You can't have them close. I'll show you it closer there against the brakes. So you can see how much movement's in that. Right, so here's the non-drive side bearing. I just knocked out there. I left it on there for now. But you can see the actual movement in it. You can see that movement. That's just in the non-drive side bearing. So I'll go get the other side out, we'll take a look at them. Right, so here we have a wheel bearing. This just happens to be one that I just removed from the wheel that I showed you with all the play in it. Now I purposely fitted these to that wheel, just an experiment. So this happens to be 6902 bearing, and this is a bog standard bearing, a cheap bearing that you find for sale sort of around the £5 mark, something like that. There's no manufacturer name on it on the seal anywhere. All it's got is the 6902 written on it there. There's no manufacturer name on it, so that's one giveaway. That's a cheap bearing. So if you're being sold bearings and there's no manufacturer name on them anywhere, sometimes it can be really small and it's stamped into the actual race itself, the manufacturer's name and the bearing number. It doesn't have to be on the seal, it's on the dirt seal there, dust seal. So you've got to look, it could be very small writing. But if there's no manufacturer make on it, then you know that it's a cheap bearing. And these bearings, they fail, they're basically not worth fitting because they're cheap, so they're made cheap materials and the quality is not there. You may fit them and there'd be nothing wrong with them, but they don't last at all. So they normally fail. If you're doing a lot of miles, they'll fail within a couple of weeks of riding and you have loads of play in your wheel. So they're not worth the money what you pay for them. You just get a quality bearing for another, say, £10 more for a quality make like SKF, NTN, NSK, something like that. And when you take these apart, so you can just get your utility knife there, just flick out the seal from the inside to the outside, like so. Just flick the dust covers off them. Now obviously most bearings, they use grease inside. They're greased, obviously, the ball bearings. So as you go ahead, I'll just flick both sides out so you can see what we're talking about. Right, so you can see the actual balls there inside in there. You see, if you hold it, if you spin the inner race, so that's the inner race, the outer race, obviously the ball's in there in the cage that you can see. So if you're spinning, say it's on your crank, bearings on your crank, say, if you spin the inner holding the outer, the inner race is moving, the finger's moving a lot faster than the actual cage. So cage speed slower than the actual inner race is moving, the cage is moving slower, as you can see. But with these cheaper bearings, not all cheap bearings, but the majority of them, and not all bearings, doesn't have to be cheap, they could be expensive as well, but more often than not the cheap bearings, the cage in there is just plastic, made of plastic, so you can push the cage out, the cage should just pop out like so. There's the actual cage itself, the ball sits in here, obviously the shape of a ball there, they sit in there. Now the cage, ones with plastic cages, normally the bearings, they don't last as long, and for bicycle bearings, obviously you can see it's just a plastic cage. Now you can see the ball bearings move around in there loose now, as you can see. You put them all together like that, and then it just all falls apart and you're just left with the two cages. Take all the ball bearings out like so, then you're just left with the cages, the inner and outer cage. See, there's an indent there where the bearing rolls, the bearings roll on there, and there's an indent there on the inner race where the bearings are roll on. Now when you see these bearings and they're advertised as ceramic bearings, the only thing that's ceramic in them is the actual balls themselves. The cage, sorry, the race, inner and outer, they'll be steel. The only thing that's ceramic is these little, the actual ball bearings like so. So that was a cheap, like I said, this was a cheap bearing. They're not worth using. You're wasting your money buying these compared to, I'll show you, this happens to be a HCH bearing. You can see the name clearly printed on it there. This is still good even after the best part of probably 10,000 miles use. There's still nothing wrong with it. So I'll flick the cover off this one so you can see. Now you see the difference straight away. This one uses a metal cage inside, so you can't physically see the balls themselves, they're cupped round with metal. So the manufacturing process of this is a lot harder to manufacture than it is to manufacture something with the plastic cage like that. That's cheap, easy to manufacture. It's a lot harder. That's why companies don't do it, because it's a lot harder to make the cage in this one than it is to make this plastic, cheap plastic cage. There's a lot more goes into the making this bearing, and also the material is a lot better quality, hence why it lasts a lot longer than the cheap ones. So you get what you pay for over the long run. And also ceramic bearings like I said, some of them come the plastic cage like this because it's so hard to manufacture. It's expensive to manufacture the cage like this, so a lot of them come with a plastic cage. The plastic cage, another reason why ceramic bearings, personally I don't use ceramic bearings because they're a complete waste of money. For what they cost, they're a rip-off. So the actual, because in a bearings, the ball bearings, like so, if they're ceramic, most of the friction is not coming from the ball bearings going round. It's coming from the seals on there. They're on the bearing to stop the dirt getting in, and it also comes from the grease being used inside the bearing. So the seals and the grease, the type of grease being used. That's why some time trials, things like that, what they do is wash out the grease and then they replace it with a very light oil. And for short time trials, etc., people remove the seals and then put a light oil in there because they know they're only going, say, 20, 30 miles or 10 miles, so it doesn't matter, it's not going to wreck it in that short time. And even if it did, you just get some other bearings, some new ones to put in there. So that's another reason, that's why they can make them faster. So like I said, it's not all the ball bearings themselves. The seal's worth about 60% and the grease is about 28%. And the cage is on a metal cage bearing like this, probably about it's roughly 7%. So 60% of that is the seal, and 28% is the grease. So if you think that's a lot, 60% just from the seal. That's why when you're buying the bearings to replace your wheel bearings with, whatever it is, you just look for a quality make, quality manufacturer for a start. Like I said, SFK, NTN, something like that, NSK, and what you're after is a non-contact bearing is what you're after. The version's non-contact. So, and also being with ceramic, because ceramic is a lot harder to these ball bearings, because they're ceramic, they're a lot harder material than the raceway is, the steel. They wear the raceway quicker because these are a lot harder than the steel. So they may be slightly faster to begin with, but anything up to and over 1,000 miles, they're getting worse. The wear is accelerated because it wears the raceways away quicker than if it was just a normal steel ball bearings. They're matched as steel against steel. So these have a constant life like that, and then if it's a ceramic bearing, it's more, they start off the same roughly, and then they go up, graph will go up like that, whereas the steel bearings, they stay almost the same, the wear. So from 1,000 miles to 10,000 miles, the wear is just constant, whereas if it's ceramic bearing, it goes about 1,000 miles and then the wear increases as the miles go on. So they're right to start with, and then they wear a lot real quick. So you might be saving some watts to start with, and then you're losing it over time as the mileage goes up. So like I said, the bearing I just dismantled then was one of the cheap ones, and that's why I put it in the wheel just as a demonstration, and you can see how much play was in it. just to prove the point. Right, so there's a few things to look out for on the bearings anyway, so you may have found it helpful. I'll say the expensive, well not expensive bearings, but I mean the cheap ones, they're not worth buying. The difference, say, between a cheap one, like I said, they're around £5 for a cheap one, and say for an SKF bearing, a quality bearing, like so, they come in the packets, genuine bearings, or an SK, say, genuine, they come in boxes like so, it's little boxes. When you buy these cheap ones, they just come loose. If it's a cheap one, then they just come loose, like in your hand. They just deliver in they're not even in the packaging or anything. So you don't know where it's manufactured. Well, it would just be a cheap bearing. The manufacturing like process was nowhere near as good. The tolerances, obviously, in the metal materials used are nowhere near as good. That's why they don't last. So if they're the quality, genuine ones, the difference, like I said, they're about a £5 for the cheap ones, and these are for a good quality one. You're talking about around the £15 mark for a bearing. Non-contact, obviously, seals on them as well. So it's not worth buying the cheap ones. Definitely not. I've tried them many times and they always fail. And that's not even using them in the wet. If you consider when you're using things in the wet, all bearings will wear out in the end, just simply because water ingress, the water gets in, takes the dirt in with it, and then it contaminates the grease that's inside the bearing anyway. And then over time, the components inside, the balls, the cage, everything starts wearing because it's like grinding paste. That's why if you're riding a lot in the winter time, etc., then that's why your bearings wear out a hell of a lot quicker than if you never rode in the wet, or you never washed your bike to get the water in there in the first place. I'll say you can pop the seals off these bearings and then wash them out, let them thoroughly dry, and then put some grease in again, just to smear it, put a light coating of grease in there, and then put the seals back on, and you can do that. But I say you've got to strip the wheel down obviously to do it. So normally most people don't, and then by the time they realise the bearing's worn anyway and they need new bearings. And the same thing applies to loose bearings in a wheel. Not all wheels use the sealed cartridge bearings. You can get the separate ball bearings they use. I mean, a lot of Shimano wheels, etc., they still use loose balls in them. And I say they're alright as long as you service them, because once the dirt gets in, you've got to take it apart. You can't just knock the bearing out like a complete bearing like this. You've got to actually take it apart, take the axle out, and then take all the individual ball bearings off the axle and everything itself. Then you can re-grease it and refit it. But they do run very smooth when they're set up properly, those individual bearings. And if you're someone that likes taking your wheels apart, then obviously you can take them apart and grease them up regularly. And if you're not riding in the wet, then they last a long time before they need any work doing to them anyway. So so always look out for a top quality bearing manufacturer, and always buy the quality, the genuine proper bearings. So say some wheels you can see what's in it when you take your wheel apart. You'll have the name. Like I say, look out for the name on the bearing if you're not sure. So you can pop the end caps off your wheels, etc., and you can see, if you just wipe the grease off, if there's any in there, just wipe it off and have a look at the dust cover. Like I said, you might be able to see what manufacturer your wheels come with standard. You can either replace it with those, or you can just buy yourself, like I said, SKF, something like that, non-contact. I'd say ceramic bearings, not worth the money at all. If you think it's about 100 quid or something, not 80 quid, 100 quid for a bearing, for a wheel bearing, then it's not worth it, because like I said, they're not actually fully ceramic. The only thing that's ceramic in them is the actual ball itself, and like I say, it accelerates the wear because the actual ball bearing itself wears out the race quicker. And a lot of these ceramic bearings, they come with plastic cages in as well, because that cage, the metal cage, is so it's hard to manufacture, so it's costly to manufacture, so they don't bother. They just use a plastic cage in them for cheapness. So that's another thing. The cage itself being plastic, it doesn't roll as well with a plastic cage over time. The metal cage rolls a lot better. So if it's a quality bearing like I showed earlier and it's got the metal cage in it, then it also rolls better and lasts longer anyway. So that's another thing that's good about the metal cages in them. So over the plastic cage. So if you found this video helpful in any way, you might have done, then give it a thumbs up. Remember to subscribe to the channel for more cycle related content. Until next one, ride safe and I'll see you then.